If you've watched any of my recent videos, and if you haven't, maybe this is a good opportunity to actually go check them out and perhaps subscribe if they interest you. You probably may remember this sword. So in one of these videos, and specifically one of the unboxing ones, I showed two piso podangs. These are Indonesian swords from Sumatra, and they are heavily inspired by tulwars or by Indian swords. And well, one of them we saw in a previous video, we cleaned it up, and it's a traditional, or what I would say a typical piso podang, so with a curved blade. And some of my viewers, actually from Indonesia, I suppose, because they seemed to be quite expert in piso podangs, pointed out that this was a kind of sword they had never really seen, because a version with a straight blade is rather unusual and, well, definitely not traditional, if not unusual. So this is kind of interesting. But the reason why I'm making this video today, and you'll see it's still dirty, I haven't gone through the process of chelation yet, and one of the reasons is that while handling it, you may remember the hilt was rather loose. And while checking out what was up and trying to figure out how to fit it into the chelation vat, it's basically a tube, but it came loose enough that it came apart. So you'll see that I can actually remove basically the blade from the hilt now. And before you get too terrified by this horrible accident, this is perhaps not as bad as it seems. It's not as bad in practical terms, because now this enables me to actually dip the whole of the blade into the chelation tube and clean the whole thing without having to worry about how to get into the section under these laggets. But it's also not that bad in absolute terms, because this is actually the way tulwar blades, or blades from swords from the Indian subcontinent, and obviously swords inspired by those, like these piso podangs, were hilted. So we're usually used to European swords being peened through, but these swords were fixed with a mixture of rather hard resins. So if you will actually check it out right now in detail, but the hilt is filled with this organic material that I can't really tell what it is. It almost looks like wood, but it's obviously, I mean, there might be a wooden core, I suppose, but it was then fixed in place with some kind of organic adhesive. So I imagine something like tar or resin, and once this dried, it would hold the blade in place. So while this is not ideal in the sense that I would rather have a sword that is solidly held together, I think it's a good opportunity for us to check it out close up for two reasons. One, because we get to see it in its dirty stage before the chelation video, but two, because we get to actually get a close-up look at how this kind of sword is hilted. So we'll get into the close-up right away. Okay, so we'll take this video more as a before cleaning look at the sword, and just as I mentioned, as an opportunity to see under the hood, so to speak, because in all honesty, I want to clean it first before I make like a final video on the piso podang as a kind of sword and everything. So consider this more of a technical video in a sense. We'll look at its construction, and perhaps it's an open conversation we can have together. So if you have thoughts about seeing it in its current state, feel free to let me know in the comments, and whatever help you can give in then cleaning it or restoring it will be super useful. So as I mentioned, this blade is very mobile. Of course, you all know by now it comes apart. So I'll start just showing you quickly what it looks like. It has these three fullers that are kind of offset, so they're more, in this case, more towards the bottom of the blade. And these three fullers, two of them kind of end maybe halfway down the blade-ish, and one continues basically up to the tip. So someone in the previous comments, I was happy to see some people from Indonesia actually join in the conversation, give some input on piso podangs and on the history of these swords. So I'm really hoping to hear from you guys. Someone mentioned that this may be a German import blade. This is not uncommon for Indian swords. I'm not sure though about Sumatran swords. So, I mean, the fullers, yeah, kind of could be European, I suppose. However, this blade is really, really light, flexible. This is not a heavy duty blade, although it may look like it perhaps, but you can see it has a lot of flex in it. Even down towards the hilt, you can see it flexes quite a bit. So if we now decide to look under the hood, it's still kind of, it fits in place still relatively snugly, but it does come off, as you've seen in the intro. So we'll start by looking at the hilt, actually, because this is really interesting. So this is actually quite interesting because at a superficial look, this may look like a Tang. It looks like the actually comes through here and then is pinned somehow on something here. It's currently, this kind of bowl is filled with old gauze, which I will remove at some point when I do the cleaning. It doesn't look like it's antique or anything. It's just it just feels old. And then it has this peg, which is not the Tang. So don't let yourself be fooled if you happen to pick one of these up. The hilt may have some kind of coating to it. I mentioned in the other piso Podang, possibly Japanning, although this one maybe seems, yeah, it's hard to tell. This could be, I'm not sure if this goldish hue you see here is like brass underneath or what. But what's also interesting is it's not cast in one piece. This is, you can see here the seams. These are two basically halves that are then sandwiched together. And I'm not sure how they're kept together, whether it's with the same kind of resin that holds the blade in place, of which you see some traces here, or whether it's, there's some other kind of adhesive, so I'm not sure. However, I don't see any seam line on this pommel cup here. So it seems like the seam here ends down here, and then this is perhaps one piece. It's hard to tell because it's really dirty, so I'm hoping the chelation will do its magic. Now, if you look at it on the inside, and here is where good light work hopefully saves the day. But if we look at it on the inside, you'll see that there's what may seem to be a wooden core. It's hard for me to say. It does look like there's a wooden core in there. But then everything is held together with some kind of a resin. And I think you see traces of it here. It's like this black substance here on the edge of the, langet. And so the blade is basically kept in place like that. And this is really interesting because it means that this resin obviously must be extremely resistant and strong, because these are swords that are meant for use. So if you can go around safely swinging these and hitting stuff and not have the blades fly away every time you unsheath your sword, that is a very strong adhesive that's being used. Moving on to the blade, we'll check it out. And I hope this is going to be then interesting when we see the cleaned version. Maybe it's nice to document the dirty version in more detail. But I think what's really interesting about this blade, apart from its shape, here you can see the fullers, there's no markings I can tell, and probably even if there were any markings, they would have been by now corroded by rust, I would assume. So yeah, we can run up the blade and just, it was sharp on both sides, so this is a double-edged blade for sure. And the tip is, well, I wouldn't want to fall on it, let's put it that way. But what really is interesting here, I think, is the Tang. So, is that, wait a second, could this be some kind of mark? It's really hard to tell because there's a lot of concretion, but I wonder. If you see anything on the screen, because now I'm looking in the screen and it's a little tough to tell, but if you see anything, please let me know. But what's interesting is the Tang. So assuming this is a European import blade, the Tang would have been shortened, of course, because this is not how European blades would normally be produced, because, well, this kind of Tang is not meant, it's meant to be kind of, you can't pin it anywhere. So it's going to be interesting when we clean it here to try and figure out whether this has been cut, if we can see any marks of like damage, and if this seems like it's been altered at some point, or if this was designed this way. Because if this was the way it was forged, it will probably tell us that, well, I assume either it was made locally, or that whoever imported this blade was producing blades with short tangs, knowing that they would be hilted on the talwar kind of style of hilt. Whereas if it's been cut, this may tell us that this is a blade that was then adapted to be used on this hilt. So we can see a lot of, you see all this concretion here. This is the kind of resin I was mentioning before. So what would hold the blade in place? Tang is rather thick, and it's also kind of asymmetrical. Anyway, I don't really have more to say about this blade because there's not much I can see. I'm really hoping we'll see some inscriptions or stuff when it's clean. I thought it was more an interesting opportunity. Hopefully it would be interesting for you guys to see a blade that's fixed in a non-traditionally European way. So yeah, I just hope that's the case. I hope you enjoyed it. This one will be coming up soon in its chelation video, so stay tuned for that. And I'll see you soon in another sword video. Bye!